Web of Conspiracy. Here is your host, Adam Webb.
Hello and welcome to another exciting edition of the Web of Conspiracy. I am your host, Adam Webb. It is great to finally be back with you. My apologies for the delay in the show. Number of things going on, and I'll get to all those here shortly. Initially, some tech issues delayed the show, and then once I managed to get those resolved, I had some personal issues come up. I've alluded to it before, and I'm not going to go into a great many details, but at this moment in time, my wife is currently going through a bit of a health situation. At this point in time, we don't have a whole lot of definitive answers, so everything's still sort of at a status quo. But going through the testing process and the things that go along with it, I just did not really have it in me to do the show last week. So my apologies for the delay. Hopefully some of the hopefully the tech issues have been resolved, and hopefully some of the other issues will slowly begin to become resolved as well. And this won't be an issue going forward, but my apologies. I certainly didn't intend to have a 2-week delay just after having come back and only releasing 3 episodes. But then again, this is a free show, so I guess you get what you pay for, right? Building upon that, I've actually been contemplating something, and I would love to get some feedback from the listeners, because this has been a difficult thing to try to figure out how I'm going to manage. But certainly when I have tech issues like had just come up, there's sometimes a cost involved, and I don't have any intentions of making this show something that anybody has to pay for. That's never been my plan. That's never my goal, and that's not anything I want to do. However, I am contemplating doing what I know a number of other podcasts do, and that's something called a money bomb. It's certainly common as well as in the political realm. The idea behind this would be that those who have the money or want to be able to donate some money to the show to help me cover the expenses of distributing the show, as well as the technical costs that come with the equipment that's involved. In doing so, any money that is donated would then go into one big pot, and then after so much period of time, maybe a month, I haven't decided, because I haven't really decided if I'm going to do this yet. But after a lot of given amount of time, the half of that money would go to one lucky listener as a prize, so to speak, like a 50-50 raffle kind of thing, right? So the idea then would be that I would have a degree of money to be able to help offset some of these costs that I've had to incur as of late, because I do my best to try to broadcast as cheaply as possible, yet without sacrificing quality. So that being said, there have been some expenses, and there's certainly expenses in distribution of the show as well that I've incurred. So I'm doing my best to be able to cover those costs, but occasionally something comes up like I did a couple weeks ago, and then there's some greater issues involved. So by all means, I haven't decided definitively that I'm going to do that, but what I am curious about is how does the audience feel? And I'd rather there be some brutal honesty. If you think that I'm asking too much, if you think that I shouldn't ask for any money, well then I appreciate your opinion. But I would like to get an idea and some feedback from the audience whether or not you'd be supportive of something like that, or even be willing to donate anything to a cause like that. Like as I said, I don't have any intentions of charging anything for the show, but for those of you who would feel inclined to help me in the production of the show, I wouldn't decline the money, I guess is what I'm saying. But at this point, I haven't made a determination as to whether or not I would do this. And for one lucky listener, I mean, there could be a significant amount of money available for them in a prize. So you donate $5 and you could maybe end up coming out with 100 or 200, maybe more, maybe less. I don't know. As I said, I'm still in the debating phase of this. So I would love to have some feedback from the listeners as whether or not you'd be something that you'd be supportive of or not. Let me know either way. Email me at webofconspiracy@gmail.com. Of course, the web is 2 B's. You can also message me on Facebook if you'd like the show on Facebook, as well as Twitter. So feel free to get in touch with me. Let me know. As I said, I haven't made any determinations. I researched it. I've debated it. There's a part of me that feels bad about asking for the money, but in the same respect, there have been costs involved, and there are the equipment involved in doing some of this, the better stuff that has better quality, that sounds better. There is a cost involved in that. So in order for me to try to offset some of these, and I'm not looking to try to make a living on this, maybe one day down the line, but I'm not there yet. My goal and my hope would be that if I were to decide to go through with this money bomb, the idea would be to help me just cover the costs incurred, the distribution costs, the tech costs, all those that come along with trying to produce a better quality show. For those of you who've been listening since November, you know that the quality has improved, and I've invested a degree of money into this to try to help that. And my intention is to be able to do more as I go, and I want to be able to bring in more guests and be able to do more and try to continue to improve the quality of the show. And some of that is going to incur some costs just from the technical perspective alone. So, like I said, I welcome your feedback, webofconspiracy@gmail.com. Let me know if it's something that you're supportive of or not. Either way, I haven't made a decision, and when I do, I will certainly make all the pertinent announcements in terms of time frame and all that. And when the time comes, and if I do decide, I will certainly let everyone know on one of the podcasts. But at this point, nothing's definitive. I'm just in the research phase, more or less. So, okay, moving forward. For those of you who have just joined in the show, welcome. I appreciate your support. For those of you who continue to come back and listen, and once again, I appreciate your support as well. The show has grown quite a bit. It's grown much more than I certainly anticipated. When I look at what I did, this show started in November of last year, and to see how far it's come and how much it's grown in audience, it's tremendous. So I'm greatly appreciative, and I know I've welcomed in a number of new listeners. So welcome, and for those of you who continue to support, thank you. And I will hope to be able to continue quality content here for as long as I possibly can. Now, a few things I want to touch on before I get into the meat of the show. There were a number of news items over the last couple of weeks that I would love to be able to have gotten into everything, and I'm going to touch on a couple of these items because in terms of what I talk about on the show, I think it's pertinent, I think it's important. Just this week, there was the first person diagnosed with Ebola on U.S. soil. Granted, he is a Liberian citizen and visiting in the States. However, it's the first confirmed diagnosis in the United States, so now, of course, there's a bit of a panic. Some of that is for good reason. And for those of you who, for those of you who've been listening to the show for a while, you know that I'm very careful when it comes to the conspiracy side of what I talk about on the show. I'm probably more skeptical of the conspiracy theories than I am the paranormal or the cryptids or any of the other topics that I get into on the show. I'm perhaps more skeptical of the conspiracy theories. There's a number of reasons for that. But the concern, and for those of you who listen to the Ebola episode, you know that I am suspicious of the development and the creation of Ebola. You know that I have expressed suspicion in terms of the treatment for Ebola, as I believe there is a treatment for it. And certainly we have seen, for those who were exposed and in Africa, came back to the States for treatment and now are recovered. Whereas you have thousands of people dying from it in Africa. Now, there's a number of reasons in addition. Certainly, views, outlooks, beliefs in Africa make it difficult to treat, and so that doesn't help. But that being said, this Ebola diagnosis in the United States now, there's a tremendous possibility that other people have been exposed. They say, the CDC is saying that at least 8, the confirmed 18 people. The CDC, as you can gather if you have listened to the other shows, you know that I'm very skeptical of what they do in terms of not what they do, but so much what they say. Okay? You have them saying that in one sentence that this is not anything to panic about. They have the situation under control. No need for panic. Which, whenever a government agency tells me no need to panic, my instinct is to panic. Because that's when we should panic, okay? That is when we need to panic, is when we're being told not to, That's just from my own experience. Now, interestingly enough, a CBS affiliate in Georgia is also reporting that the CDC sent out a protocols to all of the funeral directors in the state of Georgia as to how to properly dispose of a person, remains that died from Ebola. Now, this is the same CDC as saying we have nothing to worry about, yet they're telling approximately 2,000 funeral directors in the state of Georgia not to panic. So, a little sketchy there. Now, as I stated, I try to be very cautious about some of these conspiracy theories, but this just doesn't sit well. This sort of sends out the red flag, and it's because the CDC is doing their best to contain the panic that I'm concerned. Because the issue that we need to really concern ourselves with Ebola, it has mutated, I believe, 4 times up at this point. Now, Ebola now has entered into a new dynamic of people who are heavily vaccinated, generally fairly healthy, and the question then becomes, what we do know about viruses is that they do mutate. We've seen it happen with Ebola, and they mutate based on the conditions in which they are in, the virus is in order to optimize its survival. Okay. Now, Ebola in the United States will be of greater risk to the poor and the malnourished and the less physically well individuals. Those will be the ones that will be of the easiest targets of this virus and will perhaps be the ones to perish first if this becomes a widespread epidemic. The other thing that we need to consider, and this is building upon the mutation factor, as a result of coming into a population in which there are a number of fairly healthy people, well-nourished, and generally physically well, what you're going to see is the virus is going to have to make an adaptation. So if it's not able to easily transmit the way that it has been transmitting, it will look for other ways. And there's a number of people already saying that it's airborne. It's airborne. Well, yes and no. Droplets in the air could certainly transmit. So when you've got people sneezing, coughing, coughing up blood, okay, those kinds of things, it's very transmittable. But the concern is that we're looking at a situation where eventually it will become more easily transferred through the air than it is currently. That could perhaps be, in a sense, an adaptation. Perhaps it can adapt to live longer outside the host. There's a number of different potential mutations that could occur that could make Ebola very deadly in the United States. We will see. Hard to say. And I don't want to be a fearmonger. That's not my intention. But I do think everybody needs to be very aware and very cautious. And I think that when we're talking about people who are sick anyways, I think we need to take better precautions and better hygiene in an effort to help combat some of those illnesses. So I don't want to start a panic, but I do think people need to be very aware of other people who are sick, vomiting, expressing any of these symptoms potentially of Ebola. And that's not to say that everybody who has a cough is going to have Ebola, but I do think we need to be very cognizant of our surroundings and people who may possibly contract this down the line. It's better to be aware than unaware. And while I appreciate the CDC trying to not stir a complete panic and lose control of the population, we have every reason to be a bit concerned here. Be cautious, but do not panic. That would be my advice. Now, building on this, approximately the week before that, it also caught my attention that there was a recent addition to the Georgia Guidestones. Now, for those of you who haven't gone back, one of my first episodes on this show was about the Georgia Guidestones. Okay, essentially this mysterious Stonehenge-like type monument that was erected, I think it was late 70s, I can't remember offhand. It appeared in rural part of Georgia, basically providing what this claims to be a series of guidelines for how humanity should live and what humanity needs to do. The first one being that the earth, in order to sustain itself, population must not go any higher than 500 million people. Now, for those of you who are aware, the population is 6 billion plus. So that's a number of people that we're over this guideline for proper population balance. There's a number of potentially great things in this list, but there's a number of very off-putting items on this list in the Guidestones. Interestingly enough, it has been discovered that there has been a recent addition to the Georgia Guidestones. And nobody knows who erected this for certain. There's a number of speculations, but no one really knows for certain. However, there are cameras monitoring, and that's because there are people who are vandalizing there. But there's been a recent addition in the English tablet at the top corner. And it's a block that on one end, at one face, it says 20, and at the other face, it says 14, which would seem to indicate the year 2014, this year. Now, to me, of course, that immediately sends up a red flag. Well, what the hell is this about? What does this mean? Well, perhaps whatever is supposed to happen, if whatever powers it may be, if there is anything to this conspiracy, that perhaps the events to make this list occur have been triggered, have been put into motion. Perhaps that's what Ebola will do. I know there's a number of people putting it out there. I'm going to put it out there. I don't know if I believe it or not, but it is interesting enough that this is in Georgia. Of course, Georgia being where the CDC is headquartered. Georgia being where the CDC put out this warning to the funeral directors. It seems like everything is circulating around this area. So now, of course, the one Ebola patient that's been diagnosed in the United States is in Dallas. But of course, if this has spread and this has gone beyond containment, it's going to spread throughout the United States fairly quickly. And then perhaps beyond. I don't know. I don't know if this is real, if this is anything to legitimately be concerned about in terms of this addition to the Georgia Guidestones. But it is very peculiar, very creepy, very bizarre, and very disturbing. If in fact there is some sort of global conspiracy that this powers that be, whether it be the Illuminati or this New World Order, that perhaps they've kicked these events into motion and we're heading down this path. I don't know. But nevertheless, to see the year added to this is very off-putting. And you coordinate that with the timeliness of Ebola now, you have to wonder. Maybe there is something to this. I don't know. I will leave that up for you, the audience, to decide. I'm, of course, as I've said many times, I'm skeptical, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's not a legitimate concern either. So, once again, I would express caution. I would certainly express being aware, and we will see. I'm not suggesting that we all run, hide, find the nearest bomb shelter, stock up, and prepare for the end. I don't know. I don't know if this is the end. These end times that have been prophesized for thousands of years now, and they've yet to come. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that they won't, for those who do believe in end time prophecy. However, this has been said before, and things have come and they've gone, and life has moved on. So my instinct is to believe that this is also one of those that's just being overly hyped. But nevertheless, be aware. And, maybe it wouldn't be a bad idea to hang on to some things that would retain value in the event of a market crash. Or to stock up a little bit on food either. May not be a bad idea if you're in a position to do so. Maybe wouldn't hurt, right? Would be my only suggestion at this point. moving on, I look for different things to bring up on this show, and I try to mix it up as best I can. I try to give everybody a little bit of flavor of conspiracy. I try to give everybody a little bit of flavor of the paranormal, ghosts, aliens and extraterrestrials, cryptids. I try to run the gamut with a lot of different things on the show. That being said, for this topic, this is something I've gone back to. For those of you who did listen to me on the old show, which feels like a lifetime ago now, you'll know that I had already covered this topic once there. But I feel like on the new show, I have a broader listening audience, and I think they would love to have a little bit of my take on the situation and certainly recounting of the story. But I decided that I wanted to get into the Mothman, and my intention was to do this a couple weeks ago, coinciding with the annual Mothman Festival. It takes place in Point Pleasant, West Virginia every year. Of course, issues, and here I am 2 weeks later, so I'm a little late to the party, but I've gotten here anyways. So, the Mothman. Now, many of you who certainly are familiar with the cryptids and cryptozoology and the paranormal, this is not an unfamiliar name. I'm sure you're aware. However, of course, many of you also know it from the movie, as well as the book that the movie was based on. But I really wanted to kind of go back a little bit, give you a little bit of the history behind the Mothman, behind these mysterious sightings. Try to give some potential, opinion in terms of what may be going on here. But nevertheless, I really felt like I needed to get into Mothman again. So let me take you a little back into the history of the Mothman. Now, the first confirmed sighting, so to speak, of the Mothman were 5 men. They were digging a grave on November 12th, 1966. They claimed that they witnessed this creature. Now, I don't have the names of these 5 individuals. This is just the earliest recounting of the Mothman in terms of that area. Okay. 3 days later, this one is one of the more well-known incidents involving the Mothman. 2 couples, they were driving near an abandoned munitions plant from World War II, commonly known in the area as the TNT area, okay? And they, as witnessed it as well, it chased them, flew basically right over their car as they were trying to get out of the area. And at that point then, things began more or less to escalate. Over the next few days, other people reported seeing the creature. Then other sightings were later reported occurring during the next year as well, going into 1967. Now, let me take you back a little bit. November 14th, 1966, Merle Partridge, his German Shepherd bandit, disappeared. He saw these rotating red lights on his property over his fields. This occurred in Salem, West Virginia, about 90 miles or so from Point Pleasant. And at the same time, the picture tube in his TV blew. There's been a number of UFOs reported at the same time as these Mothman sightings in the Point Pleasant area and surrounding areas as well. As I said, Salem is about 90 miles away, so it's a little further away. But nevertheless, there's a number of UFO sightings that are also associated with the area, and that occurred around the same time of these Mothman sightings. And you'll notice November 14th, that was 2 days after the earliest reported Mothman and 1 day before one of the most well-known Mothman sightings occurred. Now, another phenomenon that's often associated with Point Pleasant and the Mothman and all this going on at the same time is the Men in Black phenomenon. For those of you who are unfamiliar, the Men in Black are these reported humanoid-type individuals, look sort of like regular men in some cases, dressed in all black suits, wearing black hats, black sunglasses, and they often are reported to occur around and visit people who claim to have witnessed UFOs. They usually show up a day or two later, begin to question the individual, try to determine. Of course, the movie Men in Black with Will Smith built largely on that lore. However, in these cases, the Men in Black witnesses, to the phenomenon often report a more ominous situation, that they feel threatened by these individuals, and it's not a funny circumstance for them by any means. Now, all of this activity stopped. All of the strange activity stopped on December 15th, 1967, when the Silver Bridge that connected Point Pleasant, West Virginia, across the Ohio River to Ohio, collapsed. And that collapse killed 46 individuals. So a very tragic situation. And of course, those of you who saw the Mothman Prophecies movie know that, saw the depiction of that as well. But 46 people died. And there's a number of, you can find, if you Google search, it's a number of pretty striking images of the after, what had happened, what it looked like. Certainly one of the, in terms of bridge collapse, certainly one of the worst in American history. And of course, all of the strange paranormal phenomena that had been occurring, the Men in Black, the Mothman, the UFO sightings, all stopped after that event, which is peculiar in and of itself. On some level, you would think, well, why would this stop? Well, there are those who believe that perhaps Mothman was some sort of harbinger, right? But nevertheless, the question then goes to what exactly was the Mothman? Was it a cryptid, which many people believe it's some sort of cryptid, right? It was depicted as having red eyes, a 12-foot wingspan, and when it was on 2 feet, believed to be at a height of 6 feet or more. So, by all means, this is a pretty good size creature. There are others who believe that it's associated with a curse of Chief Cornstalk, the Virginia militia and nation tribes battled in the area. There was an attempt to making a treaty and bartering, and ultimately Cornstalk was more or less held by the militia, and then eventually he was killed. And then it led many to believe that as a result that he had placed this curse on the area, and that this Mothman was this supernatural being that emerged from this curse. There are others, of course, who associate this greatly with the UFO phenomenon, as I'd mentioned with the Men in Black as well, that perhaps the Mothman is some sort of extraterrestrial, conducting some sort of research, doing something in there, whatever, but there are many who believe that. Building on that as well, there are those who claim, well, perhaps it was an interdimensional being, which is what some people believe extraterrestrials are anyways. So it's just building on the same idea. Perhaps this is something that could move between dimensions, something that we couldn't always see, but are capable at moments of being able to see it when it wants to assert itself or when it moves back into our realm. So those are some of the number of the other strange possible beliefs that people have come up with that perhaps this is what Mothman is. Then in terms of the more mainstream explanation as to Mothman, many believe that this is just someone mistaking a sandhill crane from a nearby wildlife preserve as being the real culprit of the Mothman, being the real thing people are seeing and just panicking, misinterpreting, and creating this mass hallucination, so to speak. Okay. No one really knows for certain. However, there's also been a number of cases that have been recently reported as well, believing that perhaps it's returned or perhaps it's come back, whatever the case may be. But it would seem, from my perspective, just doing the research, that what we're looking at here, if anything, is perhaps there's a very strong extraterrestrial connection here. Okay, as I'd mentioned with the Men in Black sightings and the UFO sightings that have been found in the area, perhaps the most curious and what makes me lean more towards the extraterrestrial phenomenon here is that you have the case of a man known as, or a being known as, Indrid Cold. Indrid Cold, often also referred to as the Grinning Man, is this enigmatic figure that's been associated with the Mothman. He's known to have had these very bizarre encounters with townspeople. And John Keel, who wrote the book Mothman Prophecies, wrote about two particular cases where where there were this association with injured cold. Now, one of those incidents occurred near Parkersburg, West Virginia. The man who witnessed injured cold his name was Woodrow Derenberger. Now, November 2nd, 1966, and this is key with the dates here, because remember the first Mothman sighting was November 12th, 1966, so 10 days earlier, okay, Derenberger, he was traveling on I-75 when an odd vehicle essentially flew by him, by his accounts, and landed on the road in front of him. Derenberger stopped his truck, and then a hatch seemed to open from this vehicle, and a tall, dark-skinned man exited the vehicle and approached Woodrow's truck. The man had a large grin. This is where the grinning man thing comes from. And he spoke with Woodrow. Woodrow claimed to be telepathically. He could hear his voice in his head. He was asked a series of very bizarre questions by Injured Cold, or whatever this thing is. And then Woodrow told him his name and said he would visit him again. And in fact, he wound up doing so. Woodrow claimed he was visited many times, and Cold was an alien from a planet known as Lanulos. Now, Woodrow's wife and children verified this as well. They verified Cold's visit to their home on one occasion. So this is not just in Woodrow's head. This is not an issue of just this being a hallucination. The wife and kids verified and said, yes, we saw this individual come to our home and speak with him. So this one just wasn't just some sort of hallucination. Somebody who called themselves this did in fact visit Woodrow. And Woodrow would later write a book about his experience that he would title Visitors from Lanulos. Not only that, but John Keel, who wrote the book The Mothman Prophecies, also to claim that he had been contacted by Cold during the process of writing the Mothman Prophecies. Now, the Lilly family from Point Pleasant reported seeing strange lights in the sky near their home, as well as odd activity going on in the home, very almost paranormal type activity occurring inside the home. And one night, Linda Lilly awoke to find a tall man matching the description of Cold standing over her bed. She screamed and hid under the covers, and when she looked again, he was gone. So that's at least one other account that at least is attributed to Injured Cold, whatever this Injured Cold is, which by all accounts would seem to be an extraterrestrial. Bizarre as it may seem. Strange story, no doubt about it. And of course, many theorize that Cold was perhaps a man in black. Some of the things that he wore more or less matched the description. But no one really knows for sure. So, what do we make of the Mothman? What do we pull away from this? Okay. First off, this is the events surrounding these Mothman encounters. Of course, there's a tragedy ultimately, right? The Silver Bridge collapsed. 46 people lost their lives on December 15, 1967. It's a tragic story. And at the same time, right, we have these really bizarre things going on in the area, in the community, and in the surrounding West Virginia area. Okay? People try to rationalize as best they can. Sometimes it's very difficult to do when you're talking about phenomena that you just don't quite have an understanding of. Okay? I often think of the cargo cults in the Pacific Islands that developed around United States dropping by air, dropping supplies and food to these villagers. And they wound up creating these airplane-like monuments to these gods that dropped them gifts from the sky. From their perspective, this was from the gods. This wasn't from other people. They couldn't understand that. They couldn't fathom it. They tried to rationalize it in terms and context in which they understood. So when we're looking at these weird events, and they're very strange, you're talking about people witnessing this giant Mothman hybrid type creature that flies, red eyes, big, 12-foot wingspan. Could there be some natural explanations? Possibly. And I think that there's been many attempts made to try to determine rationally what's going on. The mass hallucination phenomenon, well, I don't know. I don't necessarily think that that's what we have going on here either. What I do know, and what it can be found and can be legitimately accounted for, is that there was an individual by the name of Indrid Cold who did claim to be an extraterrestrial, who did very strange, bizarre things, who appeared randomly, who Woodrow Derenberger said that he was told by this Indrid that he, in fact, was an extraterrestrial. He was not from this planet. Was Woodrow out of his mind? Well, his wife and kids can verify that this Indrid Cold existed. That much we know for sure. What was said amongst them, the communications between them, well, that's a different story. Perhaps there was some sort of illness issue going on here. The thing that is often associated with the Mothman is the question of, was the Mothman responsible for, in these events, were they these mysterious sightings, were they responsible for the collapse of the Silver Bridge? There are many who believe that yes, they were, that these entities had something to do with the collapse. And that's why you no longer see them. That's why they hadn't reappeared. However, there are, of course, many who claim that they still are seeing these as of recent years. But a number of years went by and no sightings whatsoever. So, for those who believe that the Mothman and these potential ETs, that they believe that they were the cause of it, there are others who believe that they weren't necessarily the cause, but perhaps they were a warning, right? For the same rationale that they were there, and then when the collapse occurred, they disappeared. Perhaps they were some sort of, this is coming, we're the harbinger of death, right? That perhaps we need to be wary of seeing this. There have been a number of reports and claims that a Mothman-type entity was seen near the World Trade Centers during the September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks. I'm not sure. I know there's some pictures that perhaps are a little dubious out there, but nevertheless, there is this idea that's come about that perhaps that these Mothmen are issuing a warning. I've heard some people even go out there as far as to say perhaps these are really angelic figures. These are angels, right? Tall, winged creatures, that perhaps this is some sort of physical manifestation of an angel. I'm not sure. A number of occasions, I do my best to sustain my opinion. However, for those, there are a few that I'm very forthright with. This is one of those where I believe that a phenomenon occurred. Something was going on here. Something not quite normal. If anything, I would tend to argue that perhaps this is more closely related to the ET phenomenon just because of all the other bizarre events occurring. The UFO sightings, in which there are many UFO sightings from the time period. The introduction of Indrid Cold, which John, as I'd mentioned, of course, many question Woodrow Derenberger, and for good reason. But John Keel, who went there researching, was contacted by this Indrid Cold. So, I don't know that I can buy in that Indrid Cold was some sort of mass hallucination. I don't see that either. So what the hell do we make of this, right? I mean, what do you pull away from this history? Because this occurred. These events occurred. The interpretation of these events are certainly up for debate. But this was a phenomenon. And it culminated with the collapse of a bridge that killed 46 people. So should we question this? Should we just let this just be and don't think about it again? Well, I don't know that that's the right approach either. What I do know is that in looking at this, we have a tragic event occurred that perhaps these beings, these entities, these creatures, whatever they may be, may have had some sort of role in this event occurring. So, by all means, I believe that we should continue to question, we should continue to investigate. And any type of sighting like this that comes in the future should be considered. There are other people who think, well, perhaps this is one of the Thunderbird legends from Native American lore. And perhaps this was some sort of cryptid, prehistoric descendant of a pterodactyl type of creature that was living in the Appalachian wilderness. And the common thing that I hear when talking about creatures in the woods, be it Sasquatch or Bigfoot or any of these other type of wooded creatures, people often say, well, there's no way that in modern society something like that could be hidden. Well, I'm going to tell you, unless you've spent time in that wilderness, you have no idea what you're talking about. Even in the Appalachians, which, and certainly in the Rockies, yes, it is certainly believable that an unknown creature could be found out there. Certainly one with a degree of intellect, one that would perhaps have an ability to know to avoid people as much as possible. So maybe that is an explanation, but it still doesn't explain the injured cold events. So, as I have tried for a number of years, because this story has fascinated me for some time now, as I've tried to make sense of the Mothman, I don't know that I really can. I don't know that there is any sort of definitive one way or another. If you're going to force me to put an opinion out there, my inclination is to think that perhaps this is extraterrestrial related. I don't deny my belief that extraterrestrials have visited this planet, and I do so in some capacity now. I don't believe every single story that's out there, but I do think some are legitimate. So perhaps this is something as well. I don't know. I will leave that up for you, the audience, to make up your mind about the Mothman. But there's a number there's a lot of information out there, and you have to certainly be careful with what you take seriously and what you don't. I would recommend that, look for John Keel's book if you really want to do some more research. I think there's also a gentleman, last name of Wombly, who produced a lighter book, which you would say more like a coffee table book on the Mothman, that might be worth checking out as well. For those of you who want to get more information, get more of the details of some of the events, that would be my recommendation to you. But that's what I have for you today. I hope you enjoyed the show. Once again, my apologies for the delay. My intention is to not have 2-week gaps. And if I'm going to continue to do 2-week gaps, then I'm probably going to produce longer shows. But that's not my intention. My intention is to continue to do the weekly show. And hopefully next week I'll be back at my normal time. So once again, my apologies for the delay in the show. And thank you for those of you who have been tuning in and supporting the show now for the last, 11 months, coming up on almost the year anniversary now of the show. So thank you for supporting the show over this past year. And for those of you who are just jumping aboard, welcome. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed, and hope you will continue to come back. And by all means, I strongly recommend everybody go back and check out some of the older shows. And there's some really great stuff there. Even though some of it, as I said, the quality may not be as good as what I'm producing now, there's really some great stuff. The Georgia Guidestones, if you're interested in learning more, check out that episode. I think it was probably the 3rd episode that I've done of the show. So by all means, check out the Georgia Guidestones. Learn more about that as well if you're curious from earlier. So once again, thank you to everybody for listening and supporting the show. And hopefully I'll be back with you again next week.